The pelvis is such an incredible part of our anatomy. It sits right at our center, connecting the legs and connecting the spine. So it's kind of, this is where we move from. We walk from our pelvis. We kind of, when we sit down or stand up, we move from the pelvis. So it's a really incredible part of our bodies. But because of our posture, or certainly how we sit down, or potentially even just stress and trauma in the body, we might have misalignment or tensions in the pelvis. So in this week's yoga classes, that's what we're going to address, and we are specifically addressing muscles, specifically the iliopsoas muscles that moves basically from the spine down through the pelvis all the way down to the sitting bones, of actually connecting into the thigh and those hip flexors. So let's just have a little overview. This is the pelvis. This is a female pelvis, so the male pelvis might be a little bit wider. Oh, sorry, more narrow. The female pelvis is a little bit wider. All pelvises are completely unique. How they're shaped, the bones, everything is completely unique. But this is very average, normal pelvis. So if you look at the pelvis, this is kind of how it will sit inside the body. And you can see it here. So this is kind of where it would be. We have the pubic bones here at the front, and that little rubber bit that's here at the front is a ligament, the pubic symphysis. So that's really quite low. If you maybe we start just with the hands on the hips right here, you can find what we often call the hip point. This is the spine of the pelvis. So if we move right forward, you can find a little hip point. And then you can keep moving your hands down, and you'll find eventually the pubic bones, and they're quite low. So, you know, they are very, very low down, right down here. And they are together with a ligament at the pubic symphysis. So for those of you, specifically women who've been pregnant, they often or can have pain here because it's the pelvis moves. And obviously with that pressure, there can be a lot of pressure on the pubic symphysis. Then when we move down, we come down to these big bones here, which are our sitting bones. And they look very much in front of our body, but we can feel them. So if you think of moving from the hip point to the pubic bone, then all the way down underneath you, you can feel the sitting bones. And you might even do this from the back, so you can almost, on the leggings again, you can imagine where the sitting bones are, and they're really deep in, so you might have to move your leg if you're standing to feel them. The easiest way to find them is if you sit on a chair, or I'll sit on the floor, and you'll put your hands underneath your buttocks, and then I'll turn away from you. But if you put your hands underneath your buttocks and then move around, you can feel those two bones moving. They are our sitting bones. So right there. If we then bring the hands back onto the hips again, like this, you can take the hands all the way towards your back, and you'll find this flat bone, and I talk a lot about that in the class. That's the sacrum. It's a triangular bone at the back. So I'll turn around again so you can kind of see it on the leggings. If you hold on to the hips, then here you have that triangular bone, the sacrum. The sacrum is part of the spine, and you can see the fused vertebrae here. If we look inside the pelvis, like that, you can see again, this is the separate bones from these big ears, the ilium, and again, they can move. So some people have that pain right deep inside their buttocks. They're quite close together, and that could be sacroiliac pain. It could be some of the muscles that moves across as well. At the very end, you have the tailbone. Now, as you can see, this is someone, say, if you're on a hands and knees position, you can see the tailbone is kind of tucked under. We hear that a lot in some yoga classes, tuck the tailbone under. I don't think I ever say it, I hope I don't, because it's already tucked. And it's rounding, so it kind of moves into your hand, the sacrum, if you hold onto your sacrum with your hand. Then we here on top have the lumbar spine. So now the spine continues, and the lumbar spine is curved. Mine is extra curved, but it curves. And then you have the thoracic spine, so kind of, don't know, maybe up here somewhere it starts a thoracic, and that moves outwards into the to the back. And then we have the cervical spine again moving into the body. So our spine curves, and I want you to think about that really as we move through the classes this week, that the spine curves, and that's natural. So when we talk about a straight spine or a line spine or neutral spine, it's coming into that natural curve, and that changes depending on the positions we are in. So if we start to think about how we move from the pelvis, it's a really interesting concept of how you move the rest of your body. How do you sit on your sitting bones? So if we sit down, if sitting down and sitting on the sitting bones is challenging, you might sit a bit like this. So now the tailbone, the sacrum, is tucked under, and it puts a lot of pressure into the lumbar spine. It collapses the chest, and we probably stick the chin out, which again puts pressure on the cervical spine. So when we talk about maybe sitting on a block, it is so we can align the spine in a more neutral position again, so in its natural curves. The spine is never straight, it's in curves all the time, as it should be. So just for a few moments, notice if you sit to the front of the sitting bones, you'll arch the back a little bit more. And then if you tilt back and you collapse. So just noticing that, and if you sit on the floor, you might do this sitting on a chair. It might actually be easier to feel. But if you're on the floor, sit on some firm cushions or maybe some blocks or some books. And then here, notice what happens if you sit to the front of the sitting bones, tilting like that, and if you sit towards the sacrum. So just for now, just noticing that movement. And then as we move through the classes this week, then we'll explore a little bit more how that affects us in our yoga session. Just become aware of how do you choose to sit. So the classes will be up on yogaembodiedonline.com.